All right, yeah, you already got me screwed up.
There we go. We're already messed up.
Already messed up. We're live. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Closing Table Podcast. Can you believe it's March already? Spring is in the air, and guess what? So's wrestling. We got the legendary Philadelphia legendary wrestling promoter, a guy who deserves a banner to be raised at the ECW arena, along with guys who he helped make famous and vice versa, along with Johnny Hotbody, Tony Stetson, DC Drake, and the late, great Larry Winters. Let's put that banner in the arena. We're going to talk about that. But this show is brought to you by Dan, the man, Pizzi from NextHome Brandywine. Their office is out in Westchester, Pennsylvania. And as always, we have the brains behind this whole operation below. It's like the Brady Bunch.
Yes.
Hub coming to us all the way from Dallas, Texas. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to talk real estate. We're going to talk wrestling. And we're going to talk maybe some surprises. You never know what's going to come out of somebody's mouth tonight.
So we appreciate everybody joining us. It's a real thrill for me. A huge wrestling fan as a kid. And in fact, I was going back and forth with a friend of mine around our age on Facebook earlier, Joel Goodhart, joining us from TWA and led us into ECW. It's a thrill to have you. We were on just before we went live. I can't thank you enough for joining us because you gave me a lot of joy in the childhood. I've seen you at shows. Like I said, unlike Bay, I was at just about every show. I was at the store. We listen to the radio program every week. So it's a thrill for me to have you. I hope the old school guys like my buddy Mike Baker and everybody's joining in or listens on the replay because it's just a thrill to have you. And I thank you for coming on this month to join us because we try to diversify it. And once in a while, we get a 5-star guest like yourself, and we appreciate you joining us.
Hey, no problem. Just remember, we wrestled, we brawled, we did it all.
Yeah, you ain't kidding. Let's start here. I know you were on Bay's podcast, and we have some crossover. We got a lot of new people here, my real estate people. So back in the mid-'80s to the early '90s, Joel was a huge promoter in the Philadelphia region with the independent wrestling circuit, which has changed over the years, but he was kind of like the godfather of this thing in the Philadelphia region. So I could have him on. Bay, how long did you have him on the Chewing the Fat?
Over 3 hours.
Yeah, that's what I mean. We could talk for hours if you're a wrestling fan.
And we only just scratched the surface at 3 hours.
That's what I'm saying. Listen to Bay's Chewing the Fat with Joel, and he was nice enough to jump on with us here for our hour program this month. But we're going to give you the little overview of his great career and how things fell into place and his place in wrestling history in the Philadelphia region. And I took some notes this month and I wrote big and I have my glasses in my hand, but let's start so people have a little bit of a background. So Carmella and Paul, Pam, Phil were friends of yours. Let's just start there. And I read a little bit, maybe you can articulate it on how you met them. And then, of course, they become your business partners down the line, and we'll get into that. But just a little bit of background for the people that don't know. Yeah, your friends and your business partners there, and as things moved along in Carmella and Paul.
Yeah, well, actually, what had happened was Carmella and Paul were introduced to me by, as it turned out, they were accountant. Now, I happen to be in financial services, and in fact, Monday, April 1st, is 48 years I'm in the business. Unbelievable, 48 years. But that being said, I used to work through a lot of accountants, and one of the accountants had called me up and said, I have somebody, I need you. They wanted to do some life insurance or whatever it was. Can you go out to see these people? So I went out to see this couple who I did not know, Carmella and Paul, and we hit it off. And it was an interesting conversation. And at the end of the conversation, Paul pulled me aside and happened to say to me, by the way, if you ever need tickets for shows, for sporting events, whatever, he scalps tickets. And he always gets these great seats, and just keep me in mind. So one thing led to the other, and I marked it down on my little file that if I ever needed tickets, I could call him. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, he called me, and he said to me, by the way, are you doing anything Saturday night? And I had no idea what he was talking about. I was separated at the time. And I said, I have nothing planned. He says, well, would you want to go to the matches with me? And matches is the wrestling matches. I said, sure, I'll try. I haven't gone in years. So he had asked me if I liked wrestling. And back in the day, I used to go to the Philadelphia Arena with my father. And I used to watch Bruno Sammartino in action and Bulldog Brower in action. And my guy was Spiros Arion. I mean, that was my guy. I liked the bad guys. And anyway, one thing led to the other. We went to the matches. And sure enough, I go to the matches with Paul. He's got front row seats. Well, if you've ever been to a Crockett show, front row seats, and there you are, the Rock and Roll Express against the Midnight, Nikita Koloff, et cetera, you suddenly realize these guys are really hitting each other. Unlike the crap that you watch with Vince, where it's just ridiculous. And I, to this day, I've always bad-mouthed Vince McMahon and the WWF, WWE, whatever the hell you want to call them these days. And the wrestling just wasn't it. So anyway, one thing led to the other, and we started going to the matches on a regular basis because once you get front row seats, you can't miss the shows.
Exactly. Yeah. So
okay, and that's how
go ahead. I was going to lead us into the night that you saw Elliot Merrick walking around, and like you had mentioned in another podcast I was listening to, he was Crockett's eyes and ears for Philadelphia. And why don't you take it from there? When the night you were in the front row there, and you saw Elliot wandering around ringside and engaged him.
Yeah, well, actually, what had happened is over the course of a couple shows, I saw this guy walk around the ring, and I figured, what the hell? I don't know who he is. So one time I decided to get a little proactive, and I kind of stood up to him, and I said to him, by the way, I don't know who you are. Who are you? Because I see you walking around the ring all the time in a suit and a tie. It just didn't seem to be the place. And he said, well, my name is Elliot Mernick. I'm Crockett's promoter here in Philadelphia. And they were just starting to break into the Philadelphia area. And Elliot has since passed away. But Elliot Mernick basically said to me, I'll tell you what, after the show, why don't you come back to the Marriott? Well, I never had gone back to the Marriott. I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. So I wasn't even sure what Marriott he wanted to go to. So then he told me that it's the Airport Marriott. You meet me back there. I go to the Airport Marriott after the show, and there must have been, I mentioned on the podcast, it was 300 people all around. You had all the girls that were looking for the wrestlers. You had guys that were there. And I went back to the Marriott, and I went into the bar, and I don't drink, but I went into the bar, and there was Elliot Mernick sitting at a table. So I sat down with Elliot, and we just got talking. And one thing, again, I don't know how we hit it off or why he asked me to come back or whatever it was. But after a couple of months of meeting him back at the bar after the matches, he happened to say to me, have you ever thought about getting into the wrestling business? And I said, no, I had no idea. And all this is just all happenstance. I didn't expect any of that to happen. And he said, well, I need a set of eyes and ears here in Philadelphia. And that's when he explored the idea of me being his visibility. And one time he calls me up, literally in my office. He calls me up and he says, by the way, Crockett's got it was either a Wednesday or a Thursday. We have a Wednesday or Thursday date. We're routing the people around. So we'll be back in Philly. It's this and that and the other thing. Can you find a place in the Philadelphia area to run a show? Now, I don't know what the hell to look for. I don't know what the specs are, the size, et cetera, et cetera. So I happened at the time knew somebody that ran the Sheraton Valley Forge. So I called him up. Went out to the Sheraton Valley Forge, which was not laid out for wrestling. That was a building that wasn't made for wrestling. But they were looking to get some activities there. So we signed a deal, and we got Crockett involved, Elliot Mernick involved, and we got the building secured through Elliot. Crockett obviously signed the guarantee and all that because I wasn't laying out any money. And we wound up doing a show, and there's a whole story. I could spend 2 hours on just the show itself. But we finally got the show.
Briefly touch on that, the aspect of the wrestlers not being able to make it in town all time for that show.
Okay. So here's back in the day, the Crockett guys came out of Charlotte and they had private jet. So anyway, they were planning to come into Philly and just get a ride down to the Sheraton Valley Forge. If you don't know Philadelphia, you're talking about a 45-minute ride from the airport to Sheraton Valley Forge. Well, anyway, at 5 o'clock, now keep in mind there were no cell phones back then. At 5 o'clock, I get a page at the hotel. to pick up the phone and call collect, whatever it was. And I find out that they're fogged in Charlotte, North Carolina at 5:00. I have a show called for 7. It's a school night. I had a show called for 7:30, and the place was filled with kids. It was unbelievable how many young kids we had for this thing. And the gates were opening up at 6. The show started at 7:30, and they're still in Charlotte at 5:00. And of course, my concern was, what do I do? Well, eventually they got the flights out, and they gave me a call that they got the flights out. And anyway, they called me when they landed in Philadelphia. And the problem was that they had 2 planes. They had the good guys and the baby faces on one side and the heels on the other. Anyway, they called me and they said, here's what we're doing. We're getting a ride. They rented a car, and they're getting a police escort for the first car. In the first car, there were 3 people that got into the car. It was J.J. Dillon. It was Jimmy Valiant, the Boogie Woogie Man.
I love him.
And Tully Blanchard. And those 3 didn't make any sense at all.
No.
Anyway, they got to the Sheraton Valley Forge, and the deal, they changed in the car. Okay. So that when they got to the building at Sheraton Valley Forge, we had an entrance open for them. They came in, we got talking for all of a couple minutes, and we had a crowd of XYZ. So we had the ring announcer. It was me. Got out there, just made some announcements. And then lo and behold, we had the first match, which was Jimmy Valiant against Tully Blanchard, which nobody understood. Okay. And JJ was working the ring outside. And JJ was just looking for the guys to come in so JJ would know when to call the match over. Well, anyway, eventually the guys got there by bus. They got into the building. They got changed, and we had the regular card. But yeah, so we were running into all kinds of bad luck. We needed to get this show on the road. It didn't start. It started about, give or take, 8:00. And that was the first match that didn't mean anything. And then, of course, Tully was on the card. Boogie Woogie was on the card. So they wrestled twice that night.
And, Tully was in great shape, so he could go all night long at that time.
Well, I'll say one thing. The 4 horsemen, Tully, Ole, God bless Ole, who just passed away, Rick, of course, Barry Windham, which are the one difference between them and everybody else was they were the best of the best. Okay.
And conditioning-wise, they could go. Remember, they used to go for 60 minutes sometime, Tully against Dusty and stuff at the old Civic Center.
They used to do 60 minutes every night.
It's wild.
Okay. And, if you listen to Flair and his podcast he used to do 60, he did Broadways every night. And he would fly. He'd be in Phoenix, Arizona. The next night he'd be in Chicago. The next night he'd be in Georgia. The next night he'd be in Spokane, Washington, doing an hour every night.
Amazing.
He never did a 35-minute match. He wouldn't have had to do a 35-minute match.
After that night in Valley Forge, were you ready to give up the promoting side of it?
No, I got the bug. I swear to God, I got the bug. And, I'll tell you, wrestling is like it's a disease. Okay, once you get it in your system, you want to keep getting bigger and bigger. In fact, look, in hindsight, everybody knows what I did wrong. Okay, as great as our shows were, we had 2,000 or 3,000 people. But if I had 2,000 or 3,000 people one show, you would think the next show should be 4,000.
Right. This doesn't work.
That didn't happen. Okay, in fact, one of the biggest shows that I did, which is that 2 out of 3 fall match that I had between Eddie Gilbert and Cactus Jack, that was the smallest attended crowd I had. It was 850 people. And I had other shows that drew 2,000 or 3,000. The flyer that you sent me, that I remember that show as if it happened yesterday. I'll bet you we had 2,000 people at that show.
Yeah.
I remember that well. Hub, feel free. Hub is a musician, but Hub is just listening to the story here. Feel free to interject.
You can just look at Hub and see the wheels are turning.
It's fascinating. Listen, Joel's fascinating. You talk about, he talks about some of the failures, but the success he had and the ability to do it at that time, I don't think anybody could recreate it.
No.
Even back then, Joel, I don't think you realized from a product perspective for us younger guys that were enjoying the product, how great it was and how much emotion and tension And just that, like you said, when you get the bug for wrestling, we couldn't wait to get there. I used to run into Pennsylvania Hall to get to those shows because they was a pain in the neck to get there. You had to go 34 straight and get in there and park underneath the Civic Center. My dad hated going to that. I used to run in there, man. Couldn't wait to get to those shows. Hub, if you have a question, interject. We're going to get in a little more with you meeting Roger Crone and getting into one of my favorite aspects of this thing. And maybe I don't know if we put the cart before the horse, but we'll talk about the store and the radio show on 610 WIP. We'll get into that.
Okay.
So was the guy that hired you, was he real encouraging after the first show?
Oh yeah, yeah. Because we wound up, if I remember correctly, we wound up drawing 2,000 people that night. Okay, so we promoted it. They promoted it on television. I tell the story. Jim Cornette cut a promotion where, and again, you have to appreciate if you live in this area. The name of the city that we were doing the show in was King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. And Jim Cornette got on nationwide television and basically said, "Who is this King of Prussia?" Okay. And so we got the promotion. We got the people from Crockett's organization to back it up. Keep in mind, they were looking for these dates to run shows on Monday nights and Tuesday nights and Wednesday nights and Thursday nights. I mean, Fridays and Saturdays, they had those things booked.
Right.
Okay. For the obvious reason. So they were looking. And again, any promotion that you do, if you're a musician, you do shows on the weekends. Okay. But if you could do shows during the week and on the weekends, it raises your income. So they were very supportive. And they, then I started helping them promote the shows at the Civic Center. Okay. And the neat thing with the promotions at the Civic Center, as somebody just snuck in the back door there, the one thing that's nice about doing these promotions is once you got involved in it, you just got the bug. Okay. And then I started to get my notoriety. I mean,
I was going to say that. I was going to say that next. You had the respect, Joel. You earned the respect and you started to get well known. And that actually is a huge help because once people have trust in you, it really helps you starting to really get your footing.
I used to go to the Marriott, and of the 300 people at the Marriott, I mean, 10 of them were there to see me. I mean, most of them were still there for the wrestlers. But then I actually had a time where I actually I had black and white shots. I autographed them to give people pictures. And who the hell was I? Okay, but the one thing that most wrestling fans in Philadelphia began to understand is I was the conduit between the stars, the superstars of wrestling, and the common man. Okay, right. And people knew that, everybody knew that, and I'm just picking names out of a hat, but Sting knew who I was, Lex Luger knew who I was, Ric Flair knew who I was. So I knew who they were. They also knew who I was. They started working for me when they was doing the appearances. They all worked for me at some point. Okay. And, once the public knew that I was able to get to their favorite wrestler, I started to become a star in my own right. And it never went to my head because the one thing I talked about when I did Base Show, I never, ever perceived myself as one of the boys. I was the promoter. I wasn't the booker. I wasn't the talent search guy. I was just a major fan. Okay. And I think that that's one thing that really worked for me. In hindsight, it was very costly, but the fans of Philadelphia, when I had my radio show, they have something called a Q factor. I had 29,000 listeners per quarter hour.
That's just amazing.
Okay.
Oh, back then, think about it now. It was mid-'80s.
Yeah. Well, here's the kicker. If I had 29,000 listeners, when I ran a show, why didn't I have 29,000 attendees?
Right.
Okay. And it used to bother me that there were a lot of people who listened to the show that, unlike you, Dan, never put up a nickel to come see a show.
Well, that's like Mike Keener, right? So Mike Keener is an ECW official friend of ours. A lot of people maybe didn't have I just told the story before we came home. I worked with my grandfather, and when I got paid from working with him, my dad worked for SEPTA and he didn't have money to buy wrestling tickets every day like I wanted to go to all the shows that came in the city. So I would buy the tickets with my money, and then my dad would take me, and it was a win-win for everybody. Would be able to go to shows. I'm wondering if it was maybe it wasn't expensive, but because I know and I want to talk about that. when that radio show came on, and you can just by the numbers you just gave, amazing audience. And let me ask you this question: was the store before the radio show? You had the store when Roger Crone came in and spoke to you about the radio show,
right? Carmela and I and Paul.
Yeah, let's talk about the store. Talk about the store. About opening the store they call the Square Circle, right?
Okay, so we opened
what kind of store?
We opened a store called the Square Circle, and we happened to open it was a wrestling store where we sold wrestling tapes, wrestling posters. It was also the time that Hulk Hogan came into play, and all of a sudden everything was Hulk Hogan this and Hulk Hogan that. And as much as I didn't like Hulk Hogan, the one thing I recognized is he was a draw. I mean, that was clear as the day. So we opened up a store, and this Squared Circle was open just on the weekends in a place called the I-95 Marketplace. Yep. It wasn't open on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday. And I had a full-time career. Carmela was talk about a full-time career. She was a full-time mother. I mean, that's a harder career than anything I ever did. So by having it on the weekends, what happened was we had a regular television. Back then, you didn't have high def and big 58-inch screens. We had a regular TV, and we had
Was that 87? Was that 87, 88? 87,
yeah,
88?
87, 88. Yep. And we had a wrestling store, and we tried to promote it as much as we could. It wasn't a big-time store. It wasn't a big retail outlet that was open 7 days a week. And we started getting a name for ourselves. And at our grand opening, Carmela happened to know really well Dominic DiNucci and Bruno Sammartino. So we had Bruno and Dominic at the grand opening. And fortunately, I mean, Carmela knew these people. They didn't know me from Adam. And one thing led to the other. Now, while we're in the store one day, a fellow by the name of Roger Crone, who has also since passed away, and he had become a client of mine, Roger Crone comes into the store and basically says, and he introduced himself, he happens to be the sales rep for a radio station based out of Trenton by W initials WTTM in Trenton. Not strong signal at all, but he said, ever consider having a radio wrestling talk show? Well, no, I never thought of that. Who the hell ever thinks of this stuff?
Not bad.
Yeah, so we said, okay. So he says, well, here's the deal. It's going to be $75 for the half hour. You can sell advertising if you choose. Okay. You go on, you can take questions from the public, typical talk show, but it was for 30 minutes. And we did it on Saturday mornings at 7:30.
Yep.
So that way the show ran from 7:30 to 8. And then we got done, and Carmel and I went and grabbed some breakfast, and the store opened, I believe, at 9 o'clock. And it was about 15 to 20 minutes from the store. So anyway, we started with the radio show. I had no radio background whatsoever. Carmela had no radio background whatsoever. And so we had all of a sudden, we're promoting shows. We're having a radio show. We got a retail store. We're setting up. I mean, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's starting to snowball. So we wound up being on the radio. One day, Roger calls me up and says, by the way, I just want you to know, I just left WTTM. And I'm going to a bigger station in Philadelphia by the initials of WDVT. DVT standing for Delaware Valley Talk. So we said, I'm a loyal guy. I said, okay, we'll leave Trenton. We'll go to WDVT, which was based in Philly. Okay, and we wound up having time in Philly, and the studio was in Society Hill, and people, it's glass enclosed. We started having 50 and 60 people sitting outside watching us do a radio show. Now, I always kid people, I have a face for radio. Okay? We were actually having people come to see us, and we were doing interviews over the radio. One thing led to the other, and it started to snowball. Now, when they switched to WDVT, the rate went up. And I don't recall how much it was. I know it was $75 an hour, a half hour at Trenton. When I went to WT, if I remember correctly, it was $200, but I don't recall that. Then I get a phone call from Roger one day that the WDVT is going out of business. The fellow who owned it was a guy by the name of Frank Ford, and he's closing up shop. And that was midweek, and Carmel and I never got a chance to say goodbye on the radio. So now Carmel and I meet for lunch one day, and we say, what the hell are we going to do? We got to do something. Now, we could have easily said, you know what? We're done. Okay. We walk away. No. So I happened to have remembered when I went to high school. I went to high school with a girl at the time, a woman, who is now doing the news on this radio station called WIP. And I called the radio station to see maybe I can get her on the phone. And a guy answers the phone and says, yeah, I got to tell you, she's not available. She was in a car accident earlier this week, and she's going to be out for a couple of days. Can I help you? And I said, well, I guess you can. I mean, my name's Joel Goodhart. And he says, wait a second, wrestling radio. What the hell's going on?
Everybody knows you.
It's unbelievable. So he tells me his name is Tom Brookshire.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
If any of you know football, guy's a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
So he was a part owner of the WIP radio. So as it turns out, he was a wrestling fan. And he tells me a story about 2 days before he was on an air flight coming back from Texas, if I'm not mistaken, Hub, and Dusty Rhodes was on the plane with him. Okay, so anyway, one thing leads to the other. I go down and meet with him, and we wind up on WIP. Now, unfortunately, the rate now went to $750 for the hour.
Okay. 10 times what you were paying.
But $750 an hour. Now, this is back in the 80s, okay? $750 an hour, but now we're on the major radio station in Philadelphia for sports. Okay? And the rest is history. It's unbelievable.
Was that 7 to 8? What time was that? 7 to 8?
That was 7 to 8 on Saturday morning.
Yeah. Let me ask you real quick. Is Carmela still around?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, Carmela's doing podcasts. I spoke
She
to
just
Carmela
started.
today. I spoke to Carmela on Monday.
I love her. I had not seen her around. We'll have to catch up on her podcast, Bay. I got to check that out. I love her.
She just started it 2 weeks ago.
She was a perfect compliment to you, Joel. She was a smart woman. The people loved her personality. I mean, it was tremendous.
It was perfect. Look, let's be honest. If there were two of me, we would have killed each other.
Right.
Okay. if there were two Carmelas, they probably would have killed each other.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
We worked well together, and I remember at the time once Carmela decided that she was taking too much time away from her daughter. Okay, Carmela, because Paul was the silent guy. Carmela basically said that she was going to be out of the picture, and then I had to make a decision: do I want to continue doing it on my own? And I decided to keep doing it. I was having a ball. Okay, and the TWA hadn't started at that point yet. It was just a radio show. Okay, we had the store, and we became celebrities in our own right.
Right.
Okay, and most of the wrestlers knew Carmela. They didn't know me.
Right.
They got to know me through when the NWA started kicking in. But Carmela was a phenomenal connection. She was able to get tapes from all over the place. Back in the day, you traded tapes. We used to get tapes. It was unbelievable.
Very sharp-minded. And, it was like a cult-like following. Like you see Brookie on the radio who was on with Angelo Nolan. He was part owner.
Yeah.
For him to say wrestling radio, we're talking 80s now for the younger people. Yeah. We're talking 80s. It's just an amazing ability because we were just talking before we came on the air that the podcasts weren't prevalent. This was all grassroots effort, building slow by slow, and you got to the point where it was like a cult-like following, and you weren't even doing TWA yet.
No, hadn't even started it yet. It wasn't even part of my thought process.
Did you drive around and sell ads?
The answer was I would love to tell you yes. Okay, I tried. Now, one of the advertisers was a fellow by the name of Todd Gordon. Okay,
the jewelry store.
Todd had a pawn shop called the Carver W. high-end pawn shop.
Yes.
Okay. And he became one of my advertisers. We hit it off. He wound up coming to the shows. He sat ringside. Eventually, I let him he became the ring announcer. And he was on the board of directors of Variety Club, the children's charity. And when I was doing the shows at Temple University, I suddenly realized I had to get insurance for my shows. Well, anyway, I hooked up with Variety Club. They decided to insure my shows In exchange, I gave them a fundraising, a check for $5,000. Okay. And it worked because my insurance was going to cost that anyway. So I was able to get the affiliation with Variety Club, got connected to Todd. As it turns out, when I went out of business, Todd took over and created Eastern Championship Wrestling, which eventually became ECW. So I can tell you honestly, there would have never been an ECW if not for TWA.
And look at the question you just asked, Hub, and you had no clue you were asking that question. Just led into exactly what led into a major, major promotion in Extreme Championship Wrestling after it was Eastern Championship Wrestling.
And if I could have had more advertisers, I might still be on the radio now. Okay, it's just wrestling fans. If I knew that the wrestling fans who are listening would go to the places that we go to advertise. Okay, the problem is how many advertisers just want to talk to wrestling fans. It was tough.
What do you think? Do you think that's the reason after you stopped the radio show, there was a huge gap all those years that nobody was talking wrestling on the radio like that? Do you think it was because of the advertising issue?
No, I think what happened, wrestling is not mainstream in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
Okay. And part of the issue.
Back then it wasn't.
Yeah, back then it wasn't.
Right.
But today, there's no talk. Is there any wrestling talk shows?
Not real. I don't know. Like,
well, there's a million podcasts though. That's the
right.
thing.
Right.
Yeah, but here, that's what's happening. So now there's no competition. Back then you had the WWF and the NWA, and then you had a little way you had the TWA. Okay,
right.
Now you got the WWE, and that's it. Okay, and so each of the smaller promotions now, like Bay mentioned before, the ECWA did a show last week for free. Yeah. Gave it away for.
They did it on what, Bay? Where'd they put it on? They put it on
YouTube.
Yeah. The Super 8 was
so they should have charged. I mean, even if they charged $10, $5, something, you don't give it away free.
Would they have bought it, Bay? That's the question. I would have bought anything.
I would have. Instead of giving that away. I mean, that Super 8 name alone, that was the most prestigious indie wrestling tournament.
And we know it as wrestling fans. Yeah. At the time, like Joel said, there wasn't a lot of advertisers. I would have bought anything he was selling, especially when it went into the TWA side, because it was so gravitational. I mean, it was the product was we wanted it, right? We were the cult-like following. We were the group that wanted what you and Carmella were putting out there, and we couldn't get enough of it. And you saw it by the reception you got. People standing outside of a glass window.
Okay, except there were shows that we only drew 800 to 1,000 people.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. The Pennsylvania Hall, if I remember correctly, held 4,200. We never approached 4,200. We did 3,000. Okay. And as far as independent cards go, when we drew 2,000 or 3,000, we were the biggest independent promotion in the country.
Huge.
Okay. And I do promotions now, aside from my financial services. I do promotions of bands, and we do shows, concerts, and what have you. And now between Facebook, you can promote like crazy. Okay. If we had Facebook back in our day, oh my God. But the problem is, if you had Facebook, you would have had 200 other promotions.
Yeah.
Okay. There's too many promotions now as it is. There's not enough talent. And, one of the things that, and Dan, I'll actually mention this to you. Right now, I am contemplating, and Bay's aware of this, I am contemplating, because I think it's time that we have a TWA reunion.
Oh, it'll be fabulous.
Okay? And we're going to do something, if I do it right, it's going to be sometime next year. So it's a while down the road. I'm calling the show One and Done. I'm not looking to start a promotion and have a TWA show every quarter like we were doing. One and Done. We're going to have one show. We're not exactly sure where we're going to hold it yet, although we've got some good ideas as to what we're going to do. We're going to have some special guests. Again, we haven't firmed that up either. But we're going to bring back Johnny Hotbody and Tony Stetson and Jimmy Giannetti and Glenn Osborne.
I went to college with Glenn.
I'm sorry?
I went to college with Glenn.
Okay, there you go. Well, Glenn's already committed to doing something if we do it. Okay, and then this guy, Chubby Dudley's going to show up some way, shape, or form.
I don't know him.
And
Neither do I.
Maybe we'll get Hub to come in from Texas.
And I'll guarantee you this. Let's put it out there. You got your first sponsor for the show
right,
here.
There you go.
NextHome Brandywine. There you go. You got your first sponsor.
Okay, so yeah, we're gonna try to put this thing together. Bay's already had done on his podcast. He's had a number of people, Stevie Wonderful, and Stevie Wonderful started with the TWA.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And again, we're going to try to get everybody. We're not celebrities, but you want to know something, and Bay's really driving this. There were 5 of us. He calls us the icons, call it whatever you want, between Larry Winters, the late Larry Winters, DC Drake, Johnny Hotbody, Tony Stetson, and myself. Okay. We want to raise a banner at our show whenever we have our show next year. We want to raise a banner at the ECW arena, because the reality is, without the 5 of us, there would have never been an ECW, would have never been an Attitude Era, would never have been anything. And, fortunately, people in Philadelphia the wrestling fans know who we are.
I was just going to say that the hardcore old school guys we know that followed you guys from the beginning all the way through to the ECW days at the old arena. We know.
Yep. And then what's going to happen when we do this show, one of the things I'm promising is our guys from back in the day, in the 80s and 90s, we're not getting in the ring. We're not going to have any of our guys get potentially hurt. A lot of our guys have had bypass surgeries, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So, I don't want to disclose who, what, where, when, and how. What I do know is we're going to have a lot of the TWA talent and in that arena. We're going to have autograph sessions and photo sessions, et cetera. Then we're going to have matches. And the matches are going to be comprised of the local talent in the Philadelphia area now. And we're going to take the best of the best from each promotion. Okay? And we're going to contact the promoters. Since it's a one and done, they don't have to worry about us competing against them in the future. Okay? And it's a one-shot deal. But I got the itch because of the guy in the top left-hand corner of this. It's all his fault, Dan.
I know some good local ring announcers that could do a guest spot there, Bay.
Well, let's put it this way. Ever since Bay brought up this friggin' idea, I can't sleep.
I think honestly, we'd have I know a lot of guys just in my head right now. A lot of the old guys would love it. We would love to support it. You know why? It brings back great memories for quality people like yourself and what you were. That's why bringing you on, our appreciation for you and following this story and what you did for us as kids and the excitement that it drew. I mean, it was, there's challenges in everybody's life and everybody enjoys certain things. Like me and my son go to a lot of hockey games and all. Bay, he's out of my head. The ring announcer from the ECW with Bob
Ortiz, yeah.
Right.
I talked to him the other night.
Bob all over the place at all kinds of different hockey games, all over the place. Hershey, we're all over the place. I love Bob. And so it's a getaway, and that's what wrestling was for us, and it was fun, and you guys brought that, and all the effort that you put in, and like you said, you weren't making really any money. It wasn't like you were doing it for the money at the time.
Sure.
It was just for the love of
Joel, how much did you lose doing TWA?
68,000.
How 158,000?
168,000.
You know what though? Like you said, there was a lot of factors there.
Oh, sure. But think about this. I lost 168,000 in the late 80s.
Yes. What is it now?
When you're talking, it's $500,000 to $750,000 today.
And in the last 3 years, it's more than that.
Yep. And I'll tell you the scary part in the hindsight of all this, okay? The TWA, at the time, we did realize the history making that we were making. Okay? Right. Now, even the logo that's behind you, Dan,
right there,
was designed by Steve Truitt or Steve Wonderful.
Oh,
okay, he's the one that came up with the logo. The history to all of this. Everybody is still, fortunately, there's a lot of us still around. And we're going to do a one and done because I'll be 71 next year. So, we're all getting old for this stuff. Yeah. I want to do the one and done and just have the show, have the Dans of the world come out, enjoy the old feeling, do a great show, have a great wrestling card. We're going to have pins count anywhere in the building matches. We're going to have what we used to do. Okay. One of the things that Hub, when we used to do the wrestling shows in Philly, one of my goals was that everybody had a front row seat at some point during the show.
It's a truth. It's awesome.
Okay. And that's what we did, something different. I don't care if you went to the $6 seats or the $25 seats, you were going to have front row at some point. Okay. And we did a lot of what we call gimmick matches, and we're going to do some of those at this show as well. But all I know is in the last, 2 weeks, all I've done every freaking night now is I sit down and try to figure out what game, what matches we got to get and who we got to get in here and who
I'll be laying in bed and I'm like just starting to fall asleep. It's around midnight and I look at my phone. Who's calling? Joel. Who's texting? Joel.
now you roped them in. You did the Chewing the Fat with them. Now you roped them into to my podcast here. We do on a monthly basis. I guess it's good. We're going to promote that one and done show, and it gives us a chance to reminisce and all the guys that appreciated Joel and the product that they put out there years ago. Before we go, you mentioned one of your favorite wrestlers. Talk about some of the guys, some of your favorites, just briefly from TWA. Was Sabu in there, or no? Was late for him?
Yep.
Yes, I'm trying to think back. He's one of my favorite. When he would jump into the crowd, it would scare the hell out of me when we all had to bail because he would be jumping off that top rope there into the first couple of rows. Well, some of those guys, Eddie Gilbert, who were some of your favorites back then? As far as not so much favorites, but people you appreciate as far as their ring talent.
Well, I'll tell you what, I appreciated Jerry Lawler big time. Okay. I appreciated Austin Idol big time. Yeah. I appreciated Buddy Landell big time. Okay. I can appreciate Kevin Sullivan big time.
No. Yeah.
Okay. But more importantly, those are the big names. Okay. Abdul the Butcher, the original Sheik. They were great. The ones that made the show really work was the local talent, the DC Drakes, the Larry Winters, the Johnny Hoteyes, the Tony Stetsons, JT Smith, the Sandman.
I love
Sandman started at our wrestling school. Mm-hmm. That's where he found it. Glenn Osborne started at our wrestling school. Jimmy DeGenetti started at our wrestling school. So when we had Ringmasters Wrestling School, we were discovering talent. Okay. And we took that talent, blended it with the big names that were helping us sell tickets, and it worked. Now, the reality is there were other promoters in the area that had local talent only, drew 125 people, and they made a profit.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not so sure that they did it wrong.
Right.
What I do know is when I had my talent in my shows, I was paying I was traveling people in, flying them in, housing them in hotels, then paying them the talent and what have you. Jerry Lawler used to come in. Our shows at Temple were on Saturday mornings. Okay, it's at 1:00. For him to be on those shows, he had to skip Memphis television. So he used to have his TV show on Saturday mornings in Memphis, and when he was working on my cards, he left town. Okay, he didn't show up on TV. So he gave up Memphis television to come up to Philadelphia. Okay? He was buying into what we were trying to accomplish. All right? Then if you take the matches, look, we had Terry Funk. I mean, I can start going down this list. I had the best of the best. Today, you couldn't duplicate those shows because there's not enough talent.
No, not at all.
Yeah. Okay? And I'm telling you, I did Jerry Lawler against Terry Funk. I mean, I could just go on and on. When we had Abdul the Butcher against the original Sheik, that match I called Goodhart Delivers because I had promised that match and nobody thought I could pull it off. All right. Now, just a true story. The Sheik lived in Detroit. He's since passed away. He lived in Detroit, and here we were doing a show in Philadelphia. Well, he didn't fly. Okay, so he had to drive in from Detroit. So he had a driver, and the driver was Sabu.
Oh my God!
Okay, So we had a battle royal at the Civic Center, and Sabu decided we got him to participate in it. Now, Sabu was already wrestling in Detroit. I didn't discover him.
Right.
But on the East Coast, we discovered him because he drove him in.
He was unique, boy. Poof.
Yep. Still is.
So, well, we can tell that you're a natural broadcaster because all your stories are very riveting.
Well, I'll tell you, Hub, I appreciate that. It's riveting. It's all true.
Yes.
And you've heard these.
Yeah, but you're putting it together in a way that's understandable.
It's the passion, Hub. It's the passion, right? So before we get Joel out of here, one more story. The step on the foot story when you're a young kid.
I'm sorry, say one more. Oh, okay. So
someone stepped on your foot when you were at a wrestling match. Let's tell that story.
George Animal Steel. So one time I go with my father to the matches at the Philadelphia Arena. And when I go there, we're sitting on the floor, and they didn't have a gate or fence. They had rope. Okay. So I'm sitting there. I don't know, 7 years old, 8 years old, whatever it was. I'm there with my father. And there's a match which I remember being Bruno Sammartino against George the Animal Steel. Okay. And they're fighting in the ring. And then all of a sudden, they come out of the ring. And they battle themselves down the aisle where my rope is. They battle themselves down the aisle. They go outside the doors of the Philadelphia Arena. And Bruno Sammartino body slams George Steele onto a car. And I'm telling you, destroys the top of the car. Now, obviously, the car was there for a reason. They didn't destroy a car. Okay. They then wrestled their way back. They wrestled their way back. And as they're wrestling their way back, George Animal Steel stepped on my foot. Okay. Now, the funny part of all that was years later, okay, and 30 years later, I happened to meet George Steele, and I told him the story. I said, I just want you to know that you wrestled with Bruno Sammartino and you went outside onto the car, and I swear to God, he said to me, did I step on your foot? Okay, and so I don't know if he stepped on it. Now, I didn't bring it up. He brought it up. So George Steele stepped on my foot and remembered that he stepped on my foot because he felt bad. All right. And so I tell that story a lot because there's certain time. Now, Steve Carino, I don't know if you guys know who Steve Carino is.
Good friends with Mike Keener, our good friend.
Okay. So Steve Carino came to a wrestling match with his mother. And we did a TWA show at the time at Norristown Ford, which is no longer. And we had a ring outside on the yard, and there was a match, and it was Tony Stetson, I think, against Johnny Hotbody. I might be wrong. Anyway, Tony Stetson gets thrown out of the ring and steps on Steve Carino's foot. And Steve Carino tells the story that's when he decided he wanted to be a wrestler.
Isn't that great? How about his son being in the business now? That's how old we are. And
it's unbelievable.
Isn't it crazy to follow those guys all these years?
Is that a baptism or some kind of healing? He lays his foot on your foot, and then he transfers the healing energy.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one thing. When I had my shows, I have two sons and a daughter, but my daughter wasn't born yet. My two sons, I used to get them on. I was divorced, so I got them on the weekends. It's kind of the deal, and I would take them to the wrestling matches. Well, like my son, when I had the shows at Temple, they sold programs for me. They were like 6 and 4 or 7 and whatever it was. They're now 43 and 41.
Isn't it crazy?
Wow.
And we can still reminisce. What you brought to us was so great. We still remember it vividly, and you still remember it visually, and we still all have the passion for it. And that's why when you bring that one show back, I think the energy is going to be crazy in the building because all of us remember it so fondly. And we thank you for that because even though you lost a boatload of money, you brought me a lot of joy as a kid, so we appreciate it.
Hey, just to show you how sick I am, I do it again.
I know. You know why? Because it was a passion, right? It was a passion.
It was a passion.
And that's why.
But also the people you got to meet.
And that's why we bring on. Would you say, Hub?
Hub, I don't know if you're a wrestling fan, but if you're a wrestling,
I don't know much about it.
Okay.
But I do think it's really awesome.
Trust me when I tell you.
I never was exposed to it.
Yeah, I'm somebody you need to know.
Right. All right, we're going to cut it there. We can go on for hours. And we're going to listen, Joel. Maybe as this thing progresses, Bay, we can pop on with some updates on some of the things. We'll definitely have a sponsor, and me will be in the house that night. I'm sure Mike Keener and all those guys that we know are involved with we'll spread the word when the time's right. Again, I can't thank you enough for joining us for the last 55 minutes here. It's my pleasure. I'm sure all the guys, all my friends that joined in appreciated you coming on, and we wanted to thank you for jumping on this month on the Closing Table podcast.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's a two-way street, so I thank you, and we'll keep you in the loop, I promise.
Great. Thanks,
Very
Joel.
nice
Have a great night,
meeting
buddy. Thank you.
Take care, guys.
I'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Later. Well, there he goes, everybody. The one and only.
Couldn't have went better. He's fab. I love that guy. That's those stories you couldn't write a book. Oh, I forgot to ask him. Damn it! When you get him on, he was supposed to write a book. Did the book ever get done?
So the book is still in the works. I forget who his ghostwriter
Last February, he was talking about it on a podcast, and we're talking 13 months later. And I was wondering what's going on there.
He he needs to get together with his ghostwriter and compile it and finish it, but it's still in the works.
I know he had some medical conditions, and all best to him with that. We got I just want a couple minutes here, and Hub and I were talking a little bit back and forth this month on Facebook Messenger. Just touch on what's going on in the real estate business with this lawsuit so people get it straight. Unfortunately, with today's news media, the narrative that is portrayed is not always the truth. So don't let the truth get into the way of a good narrative. What's going on with the NAR lawsuit, National Association of Realtors? Let's talk about it a minute. And Hub and I went back and forth briefly when this thing went down. What's going on is that when a seller listed their house, we'll make it short, we want to get out of here tonight, but when a seller listed their house for, say, 6%, they signed a listing agreement with the listing agent. The listing agent made a deal with the seller and said, we're going to list your house for 4, 5, 6%, whatever it is. They agreed upon it. Then the listing agent, in most cases, would offer a cooperative brokerage agreement to a buyer's agency. So we would go to our multiple list service. My old broker, Dave Stinson, I talk about all the time, been in the business 63, 64 years. They did it this way for the last 25 plus years when buyer's agency came in. We would go to the MLS and put in the listing, and I would note there that I will share 2.5%, 3%, whatever, of the listing. It used to be years ago half. It's changed over the years, but I would share this much commission if a buyer's agent brought me a buyer for the property. So now the lawsuit stated that because we knew how much commissions we were getting, we were, which is in our code of ethics, which is illegal for realtors, but I get it. People do it. We were steering, which is the proper term, potential buyers to other houses. So I have Bay as a client. He says, Dan, I like these 3 houses. I go in, I look at the commissions, and I see that this one's only paying me 2.5, but this one's paying me 3, and this one's paying me 3. I say, hey, Bay, that one's not available right now. Let's go look at these 2, because I was trying to maximize my commissions per se. That's part of that argument. So they're saying by publishing the cooperative broker commissions in the multiple list service was illegal, not right. It wasn't in the best interest of the consumer. So what they're saying now is not what people wrote, not what people text Lisa, that the realtors made too much money. Now our commissions are being cut in half. Now the buyer's agents are going to have to pay their realtors separately. What's going on is we cannot publish it the way we used to publish it in the MOS. I cannot say that I'm sharing 2.5%, 3%, or 10,000, whatever it was, with the other brokerage. What we can do, and this thing is evolving, I can say that the seller is willing to give a credit to a buyer's agent, and or we can negotiate in Pennsylvania, we have buyer's agencies agreements. I can negotiate with the buyer my commission. So this is changing the way we do things. It doesn't necessarily mean that the buyer's agent commission is going away. And in my opinion, this doesn't necessarily help the consumer like they're saying it's going to help the consumer. There's going to be adjustments. There's going to be changes, and we are going to adjust to it. you need to articulate your value, as Imran Pilati, our old vice president, used to say. As a veteran agent, and I said this before, Weichert used to have this big 4-page pamphlet, and it said everything we did as a buyer's agent, everything we did as a seller's agent, as far as our representation as professional realtors. And we earn our commission by the level of service that we provide to our clients. And there's good and bad in every industry. But and Bay knows and Hub knows, when you work with me and you work with people that work with Dave Stinson and my family's group of Century 21 Absolute Realty and a lot of other good realtors, we are going to earn our money and provide the service to you, because I'm not a musician. Wouldn't I go to Hub to ask because he's a professional musician? Wouldn't I garner his information because I don't know it? When you don't buy houses every day, there's a lot of pitfalls, a lot of things you don't know. So people do earn their commissions by providing a service. If you can't tell, I'm passionate about it. You know who makes money on this? The government with their tax money and the attorneys that had the lawsuits. Things are changing. The narrative that's on the street is not quite what is in the media and what is being spewed on social media. So bear with us. Let us get our feet wet. Understand that Pennsylvania already has a buyer's brokerage agreement, which is a step above what other people have. I put out some things on social media. Look at our NextHome Brandywine page, and we'll have more discussions on this. But know that experience matters. And when Dave Stinson trained me, and this guy's got 64 years in the business, and I can pick up the phone to call him, we have people, John Leonard, myself, Mark Reale, my new broker who we just brought in, Ed Cunningham, Bill Hansel, who works with me, he's got 40 years experience. We have the experience to get you to where you want to be. And I have 18 years. If I don't know it, I got all these guys I can call, and we're going to provide the proper service and earn our commissions. Again, if I went into the mechanic and I said, we're going to cut your salary in half and I'm only paying you $50 for those brakes, people would get their back up. You know what I mean? Like, everybody does earn their money if they're providing a proper service. Hub, go ahead. I see Hub's head. Me and Hub went back and forth. The Hub always articulates things so well, and just in his thought process, even though he's not directly involved in it. Just like Hub, you furthered the conversation with the wrestling story. You didn't even know you were. And so that's why I said, he said, I don't know much about wrestling. I said, don't worry, you'll carry us through. But go ahead, Cub, and then we'll get out of here.
So has anything progressed since we just talked? Any details have changed? At least it sounded like that you said it has.
Well, you know, some communication has come out from the Realtors Associations. And I think, like I said, in Pennsylvania, we have an agency agreement in place. We have a buyer's contract in place already that other states don't have. So I just talked to my friend in New York, Carrie King, who owns a brokerage up in New York. She is wonderful. She said in New York, she's a broker in New York, and she just got her license in PA, but she was telling me that they don't have the buyer's agencies that we have here in Pennsylvania. So what I think is going to happen is, just like you, we're going to have to sit down and have a roundtable discussion and say, how can we make this work and make sure that the consumer is getting what they need and deserve, and within the legal parameters, and the agents are still being compensated. And that's going to be something we have to figure out, because I'll tell you, there is going to be people out there like Cousin Johnny from Bowling who don't do much real estate, and he's going to say to a buyer, listen, I'll represent you for $500 or $1,000 because I don't have any business and I'd rather make $1,000 than nothing. So I'll do your representation. So we have 42,000 licensed realtors in Pennsylvania. So a lot of people don't do a whole lot of business, and they'd be glad to garner some new business by offering a reduced rate. So there is definitely going to be a lot of change, and our point of view is going to be, let's sit down and discuss and make sure it's all legal within our association, we're with Tri-County Suburban Realtors Association. What's the best way to move forward, and how do we articulate it properly to the consumer that everybody understands that it's not we're slashing realtors' commissions in half?
Well, the problem is convincing the buyers that of your value, because it seems as if the law doesn't require that they need you as much as they did before.
Right. Well, here's the problem. We used to do transaction, and Bay, we'll hold up on here 5 minutes, and we'll cut here this month. But what's going on? Suppose just what you just said. Now the buyer goes directly to the seller. They knock on a door. Jane, I see you're selling your house with Dan Pizzi. He has it listed. I'd like to buy it. So now, do we enter into a dual agency, which is a whole nother story, where I end up representing, or my agency ends up representing both the buyer and the seller for only 3%? What did I negotiate in the contract with the seller? Did I put additional language in there saying, hey, you pay me 3% if I'm the seller side, or you're going to give a credit to the buyer's agent? There's a lot of things to be discussed. But what my point here is, we don't want to go back to transaction licensing model. We stopped that where we didn't represent the buyer or seller. We just took 1% to write the paperwork. Are some people going to go back to some of these other models where it's a cut rate commission and therefore the representation is not what it should be, because people are looking at both the representation and how much they're getting paid as far as a commission structure? So there's a lot of things to discuss there.
But the problem is setting up your business so that customers will come to you who are
100%.
savvy enough to know that they need help. And there's going to be a huge amount of people that you won't want to work with at all because they think they know everything. And they also might think they don't need you, or they think that they can just waste your time. I know that already happens to a degree.
100%. And it's a trust factor, almost with Joel. I would have bought anything that dude was selling back in the day because of his passion and how much we trusted him. We believed in him. We believed in the product. It's the same way with us. When you look at any one of my reviews, they say, Dan, I could tell people, but I don't. Like, they trust me. I could tell them anything. They trust that I'm going to give them a straight answer, an honest answer, and I'm going to look out for their best interest, like you said. But I wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh, I have to tell my client this, or I make a note on my notepad or put something on my phone. It's different to make sure that not only my side, but the other side is protected. And we're having a transaction in which both sides are engaged. Both sides are well communicated with. Everybody understands where they're at every step of the transaction, and we get to the table and we have a smooth transaction. We deserve to be paid for that. And like you said, we're going to have to articulate our value much more. And we're also going to have to change our paperwork in the way that we have initial conversations, both from a buyer's side and a seller's side, to make sure everybody understands what that looked like. What that looks like.
This is where I think you're going to probably be doing more podcasting, because then you can explain to people what you do and how you know what you know, and they will seek you out as a result of the media that you're putting out, the podcasting you're putting out.
And I'll say this on the way out tonight: Hub, you're seeing a lot more jockeying with how people are going to get the message out, because they're going to try to get listings, and how we're going to change the mediums that we're using to get ourselves in front of people. I'll say this. My cousin Jody, she shoots for a magazine, and they do realtor spotlights. And she texted me today, and she had quite a few, and it's very expensive to do it. But the realtors are trying to get in different mediums to articulate their worth. And like you said, this is a good way. I was just going to say, maybe we'll jump on at mid-month or something, if we can carve out the time once we get more information about what's going on with this.
This kind of reminds me of you've got guitars for the average everyday guy, and then you've got these boutique yes. models that you said they sell for $3,000, and that's because that's a guitar that's a specialist guitar, and it's exactly like the guy needs it to be.
Right. But again, Hub, answer me this, though. Is most consumers, are they learned enough to understand the quality of that special guitar and how it's going to enhance their musical?
Well, that's a professional's going to play one of those guitars like that, because he needs that model to go for what he wants. Right. Or he might be a collector because he likes that. And the boutique model is going to hold its value to a degree, because originally it was $3,000. So it may sell for $2,000.
Right. And this is going to be something that we got to figure out. As far as my company, we're a small operation. We're part of a national franchise with 700 offices. How do we play in that space? What we'll do is we're going to pop on and Hub and I are going to have some more conversations. We'll pop on maybe with a mid-month and get a little further into this. But we're at 1 hour and 7. I know it's long for people. We'll come back to that. understand that I'm still here. This isn't technically changing right now as far as the communication goes until July. It's not business as usual, but it hasn't quite changed yet. I'm still very active. We've done fairly well out of the gate this year, even though it's a challenging market. Like I said, we're learned. We're here for you. NextHomeBrandywine.com, my team. Go ahead, Hub.
Did you have a question about this scenario, Bay?
Bay
I'm letting you guys handle this one.
Bay was along for the ride this month. Bay, wrap us up. Listen, I thank everybody.
Well, I kind of think we all were.
Oh, it's not.
Because he, he definitely interviews himself in a lot of ways.
He is riveting. Yeah. I thought we did a good job interjecting because Bay had him on for 3 hours. I can't thank him enough for joining us.
That's why I let you, because there was so much in that 3.5 hour interview we did. That's why I didn't know what direction you wanted to go.
How did you think we did driving it? I thought it was pretty good.
I thought it was
great. It on the air, so I tried to pull out some of the highlights, but I was involved with the guy. I went to the store, I went to the shows, I did everything. I listened to the radio show. I was 2021, so it was a fabulous time. All right, Bay, take us out of here. Thank you so much, everybody. NextHomeBrandywine.com. Lancaster Barnstormer starting next month. We're heavily involved in them. Reading Royals finishing up. We'll have Eric Jessberger back on, but don't forget, we sponsor both organizations. I'm going to do some business with another wrestling friend of ours up in Allentown. You know who he is, some English gentleman. We'll be doing business there. So a lot going on. We'll be back at you hopefully within a few weeks. Sign us out, Bay.
There you go. The wrestling realtor himself, Dan the Man Pizzi, NextHomeBrandywine.com, for all of your real estate needs from Philadelphia to Lancaster to Allentown to Reading, all the way out to York, Pennsylvania as well. Go, call, click, whatever you need to do. Open 24/7, NextHomeBrandywine.com.
Good night.